Okay, so, all right, let me get my chat out just in case anybody's feeling like they're in a text sort of mood. I have this screen in a teleprompter, so it's all backwards, and so I have to pull all of the little windows down so I can see them on a different monitor. All right, so how's everybody doing today? Good? Great. All right, so there's so the call for testing for theme.json came out on June 24th. There's about a week left to submit feedback. And so it's a call for testing, but a lot of what we were aiming to do with this is to start to just get people to try this new thing and see what happens and see what you can come up with. And the instructions were hopefully specific enough that you could get started, but general enough that you could kind of veer off and try some stuff on your own. So, and then Anne tried to break it down so that there were different levels depending on your comfort level. And I know everyone is kind of coming in this at a different level as far as how much you've worked with block themes versus maybe like how much you've actually helped to create the system for block themes, or just coming in more as a user interface oriented person that maybe isn't super familiar with JSON coding, or JSON isn't really coding, JSON structure, and coming up with the code for that. So anyway, so who's had a chance to try out either the call for testing since it came out, or even just working with the theme JSON up until now? Pretty good show of hands. So any comments about what you found as you went through and how, as you've been working with it? I'll have to start calling out names. Anybody who raised their hand needs to say something now.
I'll start then.
Okay.
I've started doing it, and I went through the beginner and intermediate, and then onto the very advanced thing, and decided to start developing a new full-site editing or block-based theme. Just trying to use theme.json and nothing in style.css.
And how is that going for you?
I found I had to put some things in style.css and wondered, why do I need to do that? Should not the blocks be able to do the things that's supposed to do as standard? One example is in images, if somewhere along the lines the image width is set, for example, if it's an inline image or happens to be in media and text or somewhere, then the image gets, I've got a fly climbing up my leg, image gets stretched. So I needed to put in some CSS, which I copied from 2021 blocks. And I thought, why should I need to do that? Shouldn't that be part of? So I'm asking the question here, maybe.
Yeah, so it's a really good question, and it's come up before, and it took me a little while to kind of wrap my head around it. That the way that I've come around to seeing it, and if anybody else has a differing perspective, I'd love to hear this, that because theme.json is not really a styling file so much as a settings file. So what you're doing is setting everything for the block settings, including the styles of the block. So anything with a control in it, in the block editor, should have the ability to make those settings default, or presets in some cases for things like color palettes and gradients and fonts and things like that. Where styling is, it kind of comes back to the problem of naming things is hard. You're always going to have whatever you name it is always going to mean something else too, because we only have a limited vocabulary to work with in our language. So styling from a CSS perspective means one thing, and I think theme.json styles, it kind of means the styling controls in the blocks. So once I started to kind of separate those two things out in my mind, I was able to say, okay, well, because of the wide variety of themes that are going to be out there, and there should be, I mean, we should have lots of options that we could make. The sky's the limit for what you can create with styles. Not everything is going to translate to a setting in your theme.json file. That said, I think that over time, the settings available to the blocks will increase, and also for global styles, which isn't even really, I don't know, it's still kind of being created, you know, the block style or the block settings are we're adding new ones as we go along, but I feel like the global styles is going to increase as we start to kind of kick the tires of it and see what is needed to achieve all of the potential that full site editing can bring to us. Anyone else? Has anyone else had a chance to try it out and really push the limits of what you can do with the theme.json file? One thing that I found in 5.8, I did this thing for WordCamp Santa Clarita that's in a couple weeks, and when I was recording my video, the objective was to build a landing page with as little CSS as possible, and even the theme JSON that I used just so that I could get access to the template editor only had a color palette and layout set. So there was really very little, but I found that because button radius, a border radius for the button block is not in 5.8, I was like, oh no, there's rounded corners on these buttons and I can't do it unless I add the CSS. But I know that it's in the plugin, so I know it'll be coming at some point, but it's not there yet. So it's things like that. You like, one of the nice things about watching what's happening in the plugin is that you can be a little bit more prepared for what's going to eventually get to core once it's really battle tested and, or I don't know, field tested or whatever. I don't know if you can call anything in the plugin truly field tested though, since that would be core.
I think that all sounds really interesting. Hi, my name is Daniel. I just found out about this call last night, so I was able to test the UI for changing some of these settings, but I haven't had a chance to actually test out my own theme yet. I'm working on a block plugin that automates some of the layouts for Gutenberg.
Okay.
So I have some questions about the theme JSON, and forgive my ignorance, but I'm just wondering how much of the structural how many of the structural aspects of a theme would be controlled by theme.json? Is it mainly designed for kind of aesthetic issues, typography, colors, that sort of thing, but also could it be used for widths and placements on the pages?
Yeah, so it's going to depend on a couple of things. One is you have, they're kind of like layers of what you can do with the theme JSON. You have stuff at the site level, which would be what we call global styles. And that's going to be the defaults for the site. And a lot of that's going to be aesthetic, but you might have padding and border and widths and things that are going to be applied at the top level. And then as you go down into blocks, that's the next level, is you have your block settings, the defaults that will come through for your blocks. And then it goes down to some elements, and they're just a handful of elements that we have right now. I think it's headings 1 through 6 and links. I'm pretty sure that's what's in there right now. So anything outside of that is going to be handled some other way, probably with CSS or something to that effect.
Yeah, I do want to point out the layout aspects of theme.json, where you can define what your wide width is and what your normal width is, which I think is part of the kind of the structure that you're talking about. So there's other things beyond just that you were talking about, and padding and things like that. But Those were two important things that came in the past couple of months, I think.
Yeah, this came up as we were preparing for how this was going to work in 5.8, especially because if you have a classic theme and you didn't have those widths set, then it would make your header in the template editor kind of like blow up. So it caused us to make some changes in the way that we're implementing it for 5.8. But it works a lot better if you have those widths set. So right now it's just the two. There's a wide width and then there's regular width. And then those are used kind of as your content containers, either just the content or the wider width. So it gives you a couple of different points. And then of course there's full width as well, which you don't define because it is defined by its very nature.
Yeah, so for example, the width settings in the JSON file replaces the theme support. And well, it's the same way with, for example, colors. The color palette is going to replace the theme support that you had in the PHP-based theme. But when you enable the width, the CSS that is loaded in the editor is different. And the settings that are available for the blocks are different compared to if you don't have a theme JSON with the layout setting. And that takes time to get used to. And I've been building block themes for a while, and starting from scratch, from zero, with the HTML templates and a theme JSON file is a lot easier than trying to implement the template editing correctly in an existing theme. So be prepared for that. It's a bit puzzling. It's gonna take time, maybe tears. If you're lucky, it's not so easy actually. It's very different from how we develop teams.
Definitely second that.
Yeah.
Trying to make a theme, a classic theme, and to implement these things is just really, really hard. And I was really frustrated. But as you say, like starting from scratch and saying, I'm going to work within the bounds of this, and starting there, it's a completely different experience. So
yeah, I would have to agree. The only reason I was able to make it the template editor really work for the workshop that I recorded was because I really just wanted it to ignore most of the theme. All I wanted it to do was to give it some typography, which it did do that. So, but I didn't want the background, I didn't want the header, I didn't want the footer. So I was able to use the template editor to achieve that. So for me right now, that's what the template editor is first and foremost, is a way to make a landing page. If you're using a classic theme, you can do a lot more with it if you're using a theme that was designed for it.
Could you name a few recommended themes for testing blocks and plugins?
TT1 blocks would be kind of like the flagship. It's the blocks version of 2021. What else is in the repo? Carolina, you probably have a list.
I'm really partial to a theme block base that we've been working on.
I was going to say that one too.
Yeah, that is an example that we've made some children themes from, and so that's kind of my favorite block-based theme example. It's pretty robust at this point, I think.
So in the theme directory, there's a filter for full site editing, and you can select it and you can list all the themes that are available. There is no filter yet for classic themes that have support for the template editing, but maybe in 5.9.
Yeah, I think there's a tool where you can do a code search on all the themes. And if you just searched for something that would be in theme.json using that tool, you could probably extract what few handful of themes might have that support. I don't think there's going to be very many of them.
I don't think there are any classic themes yet that actually has even a theme.json file or the theme support for it, because of course it's not 5.9 yet. But a couple of weeks maybe we'll have some examples.
Yeah, that would be hopefully. Then that's part of the purpose of bringing this information in this format out to everyone. And also, as people are starting to do presentations to meetups and work camps, and hopefully we'll get some workshops out there for people to start learning how to work with all of this, and then hopefully then come along with us and start to create things. And that's really what's going to make this work, not only for having availability so that we can all share in these creations, but also to help find the things that we need to improve. And that's one of the beauties of the way that we develop things, is that we get a lot of people trying it out and using it, and it starts to push on the pressure points, and it reveals tension that we can start to try to fix and remove.
Yeah, so if you're doing a call for testing and you are, for example, trying the most advanced part of this call for testing, and you build something, please don't be afraid of sharing it. There is a GitHub repository where you can upload your team and you can have it reviewed, or you can even submit it to the team directory if you want to.
Yes, absolutely. The more themes that we have, the more we can, for my part, I learn by examples. So for every time there's a theme loaded up to that theme experiments repository, I get to look at how it was made and what makes it work. And when Blockbase from Automatic that Jason mentioned came out, I was like, oh, wow, it's like our first theme framework. That's so cool. So, you know, my background, I used to work with frameworks like Hybrid and Genesis. So for me, that's kind of like really cool to me that we start to see something built on top of the system to extend it a little bit. So. Did you have a comment, Paul?
Yeah, a comment or a question. In testing, I found, you know, theme.json worked fine. It was very clear. But in I guess in the current outline, it would be the advanced testing steps of trying to recreate a theme with full site editing or the block editor. I found myself hitting a wall when trying to figure out how to modify the theme based on the query. Like, for example, in the traditional theme hierarchy, if you have a custom post type, you can create singular hyphen post type.php or archive hyphen, you know, whatever the post type name, product or whatever it is, .php. But I wasn't sure within the block editor context how to modify the query block, or how to modify the query, or how to name a slug of a template so that it loads at the appropriate time for a custom post type or a custom archive.
Yeah, so the hierarchy should all match, except that instead of a PHP file, you use an HTML file. So that should, and then the file goes into that template directory. So if you look at some of the themes that we have, you should see that. So Carolina linked to the theme experiments repo that has a bunch of themes. And some of these, I think, should have some different structures that you can see, like the ambitious theme. I just clicked into a random one. This one has quite a few. There's a single.html, a page.html, index.html. And where it gets a little different is when you are working with page templates. Because so in classic theming, where you would put the header area section to kind of declare it as a template, it doesn't quite work the same way with block themes. So I'm still trying to wrap my head around actually how to use that. So maybe someone else has done a little bit more with the page templates. I think that I know that you can declare them in your theme JSON or register them, but that is mostly for setting the area that they belong to, I'm pretty sure. So that you can like enable, like if you were going to create a template part that was going to be specifically for a header, but maybe was not the main header, you could declare the template part as part of the header. But then there's another place where you can do the page templates. And I think what that does is it declares the support for which post types it's going to be available for. So I'm thinking out loud right now. Sorry for my stream of consciousness.
Great, thank you. That's perfect. I'll take a closer look at the examples.
Yeah. But I don't know which themes might have that page template declaration. Does GT1 blocks have any? Anybody know off the top of your heads? Yeah, there's the page home. So, which if you follow the structure of your of the hierarchy, page home would be a page named with the slug of home. And but it's also a page template that you could apply to a different page.
If I remember correctly, there is no UI in the site editor to create templates for custom post types. So you would have to create the HTML file first to make that available. And then of course you decide if you want to edit the block markup in your code or if you want to work, you know, with what you get in the editors and move blocks around. But you would have to create the file first.
And there are big places in the theme.json structure that we did not cover in this call for testing. The idea was to keep it pretty basic so as not to overwhelm. But then we kind of threw everyone into the deep end with that advanced suggestion that now that you know like 1/10 of the stuff, go and make a whole thing. So I don't know that you could actually make that jump without doing some extra reading and research into the documentation and into looking at some what other things have done in the past. Now, ideally, at some point in a perfect future world, we will not be writing this file by hand. Hopefully at some point we'll get some tools out there to make it a little easier.
I've been writing JSON by hand for years. It's not going to change. I mean, maybe there'll be tools, but I'm fine with it.
Yeah, well, I think if you're a command line person, you're probably never going to go and use the GUI anyway, so.
It's in my name.
That was clever. It took me a little too long to catch it though.
One problem I have is if you do make a mistake in theme.json, now that it's nicely does tell you that it's wrong, but unfortunately the WordPress error is misleading because it tells you it's wrong and then points you to a bit of PHP or the line where it's detected it. And I wish it didn't say that bit.
Yeah, I think the best thing that I could suggest is to use an IDE that will check for errors in your JSON. I know that Visual Studio Code will kind of give you a squiggly line if you're missing a hyphen or missing a comma or a bracket or something like that.
I agree though, Herb. I think it'd be really nice to have the JSON parse error, like, hey, you're missing something on line 412 of your JSON file.
Yeah, unfortunately PHP doesn't provide it.
No, yeah, not out of the box, I guess.
Yeah.
It's not only about the formatting of actual JSON. I need to know, is this control available? Or am I making something up and it's giving me an error because I made a typo?
Yeah, that's it.
Maybe I wrote pudding instead of padding. I mean, there's no validation of the actual content, it's just the formatting.
I want 6 pixels of pudding, come on.
I spent quite a while trying to define my own font weights, and because I think I must have copied them from 2021 blocks, but I didn't realize that they'd been removed from the theme.json, even though Gutenberg does actually support it itself in its own file somewhere.
I think that was always intended to be added back, but again, no one is working on that right now because everyone's busy actually shipping 5.9.
Mhm.
I wonder if anyone's tried setting the version number to anything other than 1.
I have
I did
not.
try setting it to pickle once, just
Pickle.
testing the versioning feature, but it didn't work.
Did
There
you
was
get
no pickle version.
What was the experience you had when you did that? Did it throw an error
Oh,
or did it just work?
No, for me, it just went back to assuming it was version 0 or not version 1. Seemed to.
Oh, okay. I didn't realize, no, there was a version 0.
It was a version not 1.
Version not one.
I've been calling it 0. I don't know.
We could call it pickle. You've named it. Good job.
Right, there we go. Yeah, we've actually had what probably 4 structures of theme.json before we actually versioned version 1, I think.
Mm.
I don't know. It was a moving target for a few months there.
Is it not a moving target
Well,
now?
it's still a moving target, that's for sure. Yeah.
We've slowed the target down slightly.
It's definitely slowed down. Yeah. Yeah, it's definitely slowed down.
But the world gets more complicated when you start thinking about what you can put in block JSON as well.
Yeah.
When
Yeah,
you,
that's
so
a whole nother thing.
I was thinking, so maybe my blocks should also support some of these options. So I took a very simple block, which is a block to give you the edit link for a post, which Genesis used to provide as a standard thing.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought, well, I wonder if I can style my block with different fonts and different colors and so on. So I put that logic in there and then found that I could use theme.json to turn on and off the customization options. And that's something that you have to learn and understand, that doing that, changing something in theme.json might actually change the way a block behaves.
Yeah, that's part of the point of theme.json is to be able
but you
to.
can do the opposite. You can try to add in something that a block doesn't support, and then, especially if it's a server-side rendered block, find out that you've broken the block because it's now passing through attributes that aren't expected by the receiving block.
Were you able to break it in that way with just the theme.json, or was that in a block JSON?
Good question. I was changing it in block JSON because
Okay.
I was trying to do it, but I don't know if yeah, I did do some things in theme JSON, I think, because I'm to define a default font size, which is enormous, which I didn't expect to do.
Yeah, that is an expected thing to be able to. So it's like the setting the presets for the drop downs for your controls. So things like font sizes and what else can you do? Font families and font families are still a little tricky because you can add it to the list, but it's not going to load unless you load it somewhere. So it works okay for web safe fonts. But if you start adding custom fonts in, you still have to load the files. And then you have presets for colors and gradients and duotones as well. So I think of like working down the file, I think of like it's like you've got your colors and you've got your, oh, I wish I had it in front of me. Let me see if I can.
Borders, colors, spacing, typography, layouts.
That's it. Mm-hmm. Yep. So, well, layout is, so you have your top level things, which is version, styles, settings, page templates, and template parts. I think those are all of them. And then you go in a level, and then in settings, you have all of those typography, colors, whatever the rest of them are.
What's the term for when you're talking about a particular setting at a level? So if I say settings.border.custom color, for example, would you call that an element?
I don't know if, are we using JSON terminology when we talk about these things? Do you know, Jason? I don't know if we have one true naming convention.
I would call everything in theme.json a setting. I don't know if that's right, but that's probably what I would call it.
It is a bit difficult to describe that because we have objects, we have arrays, and we have nested in. I mean, if you take an element for a block, which can be it's a link, and then that link can have colors, it can have typography, it can have padding, and then you have I don't know how many levels nested.
From a JSON perspective, I think that it's always going to be a key value pair, but that doesn't really make sense for the way that we're using it in this case. That's really generic. So yeah, but settings I think makes some sense. But then you can have an array in your setting.
Yeah.
But then we have a thing called settings.
We've got things called elements.
Yeah.
Is there a schema defined anywhere that would help to validate some of these settings or explain or document the structure?
It's still moving, it's still changing so quickly that it's not like we have a complete list of all the possible things that you could have.
The Gutenberg documentation isn't horrible for the theme settings.
And there are a couple things. I think that there's a supports thing or two that still need to be added for what's going to be in 5.8. The challenge is that sometimes you kind of have to see if it works because it's not always clear what's in the plugin versus what's in core. And that's going to become more and more the case as we go forward because we don't ship everything that's in the plugin to core every version. We can't because it's not ready, but we have to still keep the train moving forward and to provide some documentation for those things. So hopefully we'll start to put some information, more clear information about like what this applies to as we build out the documentation going forward.
Yeah, testing right now is not easy because you have different WordPress versions, you have different plugin versions. You might have the Gutenberg from the plugin director, and you might have the Gutenberg version from the GitHub. Yeah, and then you have a hybrid theme, you have a classic theme, you have a child theme that is a block-based theme, and yeah, it is a bit chaotic.
Going on to the child themes, if I may, and theme.json for that. I looked at how Blockbase and Quadrat and Malin Blocks did it and thought, oh, well, that's a bit too complicated for me because I don't necessarily need a build process there. So I then decided I'd just have a theme.json in my child theme. But then I thought, well, if you are having a child theme and you want to basically modify the behavior of the parent theme, you don't really want to copy all of theme.json, but you do need some bits. So for example, I created a child theme which was integrated with WooCommerce. So I decided to add some WooCommerce colors in. So my palette was the same as before, plus 2 more colors. But there's no way of specifying in, say there was a child theme.json, that these are new colors I'm adding, as opposed to these are colors that I'm changing, or these are colors that I actually don't want anymore. So you can't specify this isn't a color that I support.
And I think some of that is why we don't yet have child support across for these kinds of themes, because what's the right answer there? it's a really, really tough one. And that's why we have this build process for block-based and its child themes. And I
But
hate the build
how
process.
did your build
but,
process know that you wanted to remove something?
if it's an
Doesn't it?
array, we replace. If it's an object, we copy. So that's our simple rule for block-based, essentially. So palette is a complete replacement,
Right.
and anything else, we just take the two objects and merge them with the child theme being taking precedence. So I'm not sure that's the right solution, but that's the one that's working for us right now anyway.
Yeah, we have to test different things. So without this process where you combine the parent theme and child theme, the theme.json is actually not inherited. If you add a child theme and you don't have a theme.json file in the child theme does not work. It doesn't even load the templates, so it's quite buggy. So if you have a child theme, first you have to add your own theme.json. Of course, you have to have the style CSS file with the information about the parent theme name and the child theme name, everything like that. And you need an index.html file. So what you're ending up with, you have to have your own template parts, your own theme.json, and your own index template, which basically means that you have an almost full parent theme. So right now, creating child themes for block-based themes is kind of useless. If the purpose of the child theme is to have something small and simple.
I did have to write some override stuff so that finding template parts was searched first in the child theme, then went to the parent theme. And I did that for templates as well, I think, but I couldn't tell the site editor to do it. So the site editor just gave me completely blank blocks where it couldn't find something.
Yeah, it's.
And I don't know whether or not the templates tag needs to still have which theme it's being loaded from or specifying.
Yeah, that part was removed because it didn't work when the theme was placed in a different directory than just the WP content themes. Then the template part broke.
Right, which is how theme experiments worked, wasn't it?
Yeah, that's how we discovered it.
Yeah, I think the child theming question is going to be ongoing. I would say that some might be somewhat surprised at the preference to continue forward with the parent-child theme formatting, like the structure. Because I think it's easy to think, well, if I'm only just having these few files, then why would I need a parent-child structure? But once you get out into, for example, a commercial setting like Genesis, for example, where you have your framework acting as a parent theme, and then the child theme is where you make all your adjustments. That is going to be a thing. And it came up recently, I think, in the education space, higher ed, where you have these very, very large multi-sites where they want to have one code base to run almost everything, but then be able to make small adjustments for individual sites or groups of sites. And without some kind of a parent-child theme structure, that is basically not possible. So I have a feeling that we're going to have to see more movement back towards some kind of code-based structure that will allow those kinds of differences between a parent and a child. And will it be exactly what we know from the past? I really don't know. We're in WordPress pretty accustomed to be able to filter everything. And so we expect that now moving into this, we'd also be able to filter all of our settings for theme.json. And right now that's, for some things, I guess it's sort of kind of an option. as far as like being able to set palettes at a per block level, for example. Like you could set the colors for a specific block in theme.json.
Yeah, I have heard and understand that there are plans for that process, for that the filtering of theme.json especially, which to me is the biggest child boon, the child theme boom. So I think it's just another matter of figuring out the best way to do it, you know, particularly being able to filter the entire theme.json, especially while it's such in flux, is a difficult thing to try and nail down to make sure that you're filtering the right things, that we're allowing the right things to be filtered in the right steps. So I don't know when and how it's going to land, but I'm pretty sure that there's enough people that won't be quiet about not having child themes that something will happen there.
It will be interesting for sure in a couple of years. I'm going to say years, not months, when we have a parent theme that is only a theme.json file, and then you want to change, I want to change 3 colors. Are we going to have a child theme.json file, which I know a theme again that is of 1 file to change just that? Yeah, we'll see.
Yeah, it's a bit of a slippery slope, just like with classic theming, where you'd have people come and ask how they would make a grandchild theme or a great-grandchild theme, or that would happen when I was working in the Genesis space a lot, that people would not want to modify their child theme because it was provided for them, and so they would want to create a grandchild instead. So it gets tricky. So as far as I guess for the theme.json not loading from the parent theme, I kind of come to terms with that for myself to some extent, that I'm okay with copying and pasting it, because that's what I would have had to do with the child theme too, with the style CSS file. It uses it for the loading the template name, but it doesn't actually load the CSS into the site unless I tell it to. So coming from a background where I relied a lot on child theming, I'm okay with that for the moment. But you're right about it not being able to override, selectively override portions of those settings, because they are settings. We expect to be able to tweak them out the way we want them to be really easily.
Also, if your parent team has a lot of templates and you want to remove those in the child theme, it's not possible. Just
that comes back to filtering. Yeah.
There is a filter for page templates. It just does not work with the HTML files.
Mm-hmm.
It works for classic themes, but
yeah, and I think, could you set it to be, oh no, could you set a page template, I guess, to not be accessible from any post type? Like make up some random post type that doesn't exist. I don't know. It's not a good solution. I'm just curious. I just wonder if it would work.
I mean, ideally, of course, the filters should work, or you should be able to say no in theme.json. I just don't know this.
Well, we have a little bit of start on that to add and remove theme support. Add and remove support for different things. So it seems like a natural progression of that idea to be able to add and remove support for a specific template or a specific
it is interesting right now with the new WordPress version that's coming out, that when you have a theme.json file, you can't disable the template editing.
Mm-hmm.
So you can't choose to only have styles, the CSS custom properties and settings from the theme.json file. You also have to have the template editing. You can't remove the theme support, nothing happens.
Yeah. Because that was the decision that was made to make it one of the toggles, but it's too high up in the priority. I don't know if that's actually the mechanism that makes it work or not work, but that's what my brain is telling me it should be.
Can we go back to something a bit simpler?
Sure.
I was looking at the ability to set padding and margin on my blocks, and I found that I couldn't set a negative margin. And I thought, is that intentional?
Never tried to do that with theme.json.
I was trying to do it with the global styles and
Carolina, you're nodding your head. Enlighten?
I'm nodding my head because I opened an issue for it on GitHub, and then I find out there already was an issue opened. I don't think there is a pull request to fix it yet, but yes, there are definitely more people who want the negative margin, because yes, we do have we can register block styles, but if we do have the negative margin, we can position elements much easier. And I do believe it works if you change it in the HTML file and you don't go to the editor and try to change things. So for example, you can position it on the front. It's like an error, but it's going to error in the editor. So it depends on how you're creating the theme for. If it's your own site, just go ahead. Yeah, maybe not if you're going to share it with someone.
But that would work in the templates, right? But not in your block configuration in theme.json.
Mm-hmm.
Interesting.
Yeah, so there are two different things. There's the setting the default to a negative in your theme JSON, and then there's allowing negatives in the editor settings at all. So,
this is something that we in Genesis blocks have been talking about too, like allowing negative margins on some of our container blocks. And as soon as you do, responsive becomes a big question, because not everything that works with a negative margin on desktop does on mobile. And you need to reconcile that too. So I feel like responsive and global styles, I feel like that could still massively change the schema. I think there's a lot there to consider.
Yeah, I think you're right. It's something that hasn't really been implemented at all yet. So in most page builders have some kind of a choose your device kind of mechanism.
Right. Yeah.
And even the preview in the customizer has that. So, but we don't have anything equivalent to that in the site editing yet.
Yeah, and I think that's not just a full site editing thing. That's a blocks in general, block editor in general kind of a thing.
Yeah, it basically triples or more
that's
the
right.
number of settings required.
Especially if I want it to look good on my fridge, like if I have a smart fridge with a screen, well, who knows what's coming next, like Apple's going to come out with who knows what next year. And now we need to accommodate that screen size, and the world is always changing, right? So it's crazy to think about how you would tackle that without, I don't know. And I think the concern for me is that as we layer on more things like theme.json, without considering responsive first, it makes it harder and harder to do it later, because it affects more and more things. Yeah. Something we've come to talk about is that responsivity should almost be talked about in the same way as accessibility. It's not something you can just solve. It's got to be part of every conversation. So yeah, that's how we talk about it now.
Yeah, that has been a struggle, is trying to achieve responsive.
Yeah, I'll take it.
Achieve that without using breakpoints.
Right. Yeah.
Because there's no concept of breakpoints in theme.json. And initially that was really frustrating. But the limitation has driven me to understand more and better responsive concepts, like different ways to scale things, min-max. There's a word for it, but
like with CSS grid and things like that, or
using grid. I love grid, but where essentially your CSS values are equations,
right?
If you will, rather than just explicit pixel values. And using different, stop using pixels, using just better, more responsive measurements. And so if theme.json ultimately does have a like media query breakpoint style configuration, I don't know that it won't. I'm glad that it doesn't now, because it's forcing me to find better, cleaner ways to do that.
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah. I coming from my agency experience, you get a lot of clients who don't understand that responsive doesn't mean it's going to look the same on every device. So then they're like, well, why does it look different? It's because it needs to, because it's more about the experience of the person viewing it than your aesthetically, opinionated design.
Yeah, I think the one that I consistently run into is if the word is too long. There's not a lot you can do about that with automatic fallbacks or even using the right unit. Like say I'm building a medication site and some of the names of these things are pretty long. And on desktop, I want it to be a certain size because it looks fine at a big font size on desktop. But even the fallback font size for mobile isn't small enough because the word is too long. It makes it really hard to do that automatically without breakpoints. Even though I don't like breakpoints, you're stuck because you need to specifically somehow handle it. It's really tough.
Yeah.
Anyways, just something that I'm thinking about with all of this, like how does responsivity play into it? It is surprising to me, I guess, that it isn't a higher talking point in general with the Gutenberg project, just because everyone's on their phone these days. And that the whole block editor is built in a desktop context.
Is that because the people that are using page builders have already got it and they're not going to switch until they see Gutenberg does something similar or better?
I think that they won't switch unless it's going to make their lives easier. If you're already using this tool, you probably aren't going to switch back to core if you're happy with what you've got. I mean, but we always want to be improving. But what we're not. I don't think we're trying to become a replacement for Beaver Builder. We're trying to do something more central and more holistic. So it'll never be exactly that, I don't think. Well, I love this conversation about responsivity because it is something that probably needs to be talked about more in the development and design level. So that's something that I can share back to the product.
Cool. Yeah, the one thing that is exciting for me is looking at the way the full site editor now runs in an iframe, because you can actually make media queries work with that. When you pop the size of the iframe to be smaller, any CSS media queries you have running will actually apply. That's something that could never be done until that editor was sitting in an iframe like that. So I think that there are things that are enabling this to change. But again, I think I don't know that anybody, including page builders, has necessarily nailed, how to solve these problems. It is really, really tough.
Yeah, I think it would be great if it were more than just a click the little icon of a tablet to see the tablet view, because not every tablet is the same.
That's
So
right.
it's just
Yep.
a tablet, not
I
the
just had
tablet.
that. I know it's anecdotal, but I just had that with somebody who was on an iPad mini, I think. I don't even think they sell those anymore. But I have another product where I have a breakpoint selector, and they changed it for the iPad, and they were like, it didn't fix it on my iPad mini, and I couldn't do anything for them. So yeah, it's tough.
Mhm.
You don't know
I
what
still use
people are
my
using.
iPad mini.
I do too.
Sorry. Yeah.
It's a great size. I just love it.
Yeah.
That's my favorite size for reading books anyway. So now you know who the two people with iPad minis are in the world.
I've got an iPad Air, which is probably just as old. Doesn't support certain types of JavaScript, so that my charts no longer display on my iPad.
That technology, it's like an escalator. You got to decide when you get on. And then it just keeps on dragging you down. I love these conversations where we don't have any idea where we're going. It's pretty great.
Right?
Now, this isn't exactly a theme.json thing. It's to do with how it appears. When you have a default, I never know what the default is, and it doesn't tell me what the default is. And I want to know what the default was to know. Does anyone else have that problem?
We need a master
Yes.
theme JSON or something.
So
So
when
You mean within
have,
the full site editor?
And well, yeah, or a block editor. So you go and have a look, and it has padding, and you think, well, there's nothing set for padding, but I can see it's got some. So you go and change the value, and suddenly it changes to 1, and then resets it completely from how it was. And you think, oh, wonder what the defaults are. And if your padding was different, top, right, bottom, left, then you can press reset, but you still have no idea what the default was.
I think part of the challenge there is there's not just one place where that could come from. It could be coming from the theme, or it could be coming from some kind of default styling that's being loaded by the block editor.
It doesn't display the values. I'd like to know what the values were, but maybe it's just because.
If they're in theme JSON, then it'll display them, right? Like, won't
Yeah,
open it would set that as the default. And then if you have a theme that's setting it in CSS and then loading that style into the editor, then you're not going to see it. It won't be parsable in the same way.
Yeah, precisely, because I think when you apply it in that way, it doesn't care what anyone else is setting it to. You're a user, so I'm going to let you apply it for sure. But if it's not applied by the user, then you're right. It could be applied by CSS. It could be a block configuration. So the source of that padding is not always known, I guess.
but what I find problematic is that when I do set a default in theme JSON, I want it to show in the control and on the block. Then it doesn't matter if something else is styling the block. I want the control. The default in the control should always match what I'm setting. This is going to be a problem in the global style setting if it doesn't say the correct value when I open the control.
Yeah.
Yep.
I mean, imagine
both have a good point.
Font family, for example, that one is going to be big. If that one just says default, doesn't say the actual name that is set in by the theme, that's going to be very confusing.
Yep.
Is there an issue on that one, Karina?
I'm not sure. How many thousand issues and pull requests are there? 700 pull requests, something, or has grown? Wait, we do have GitHub link right here. Okay, so 690 pull requests, 3,000 issues. So there might be one somewhere.
To me, personally, from my perspective, a lot of these issues sound like they are related to validating the theme.json. And in order to validate it properly, you need to have some sort of schema which defines what the base properties are, which ones can be overridden, which ones shouldn't be overridden. Then you could have a sort of abstract concept for how child themes could override or replace or remove some of these properties. I understand that the REST API has schemas. There's schemas applied to various parts of the backend, but I don't see any work in place for creating a schema. There is a GitHub issue around this concept, but I don't know if any work's been done on it yet. I can post that. But I would think that having a schema in place which defines in some basic sense what the properties are available and how they can be modified in the future could be one of the first steps to kind of making this more concrete.
Do we think that there's not a schema or there's not a documented schema? Because it feels to me like something's already there. Is it that we don't have it explained in the right way yet? And then maybe to be able to see what might be missing?
That's a great question.
I am thinking out loud from a documentation standpoint now, because that's something else I'm thinking a lot about, like right now as we get ready for 5.8. Because if it's just something that we need to like have a chart that says, here's the thing, and these are all of where we start from, it would be a lot easier to build off of that than like guessing based off of things that other people have done in their own experimentation.
I just posted a couple of links to code that I reference when I'm looking for those schema, structure, and shape things. I don't know that that's quite what you're looking for, or what you mean.
It even calls it a schema.
It's called a schema. It doesn't strike me as precisely a schema, but maybe it's used in that way. I don't know if that's helpful.
It's setting everything to null, so it gives it a place to begin. So I guess there's your ultimate defaults right there. Everything's null.
And again, I don't know to what extent this is replicated in core. I don't know what the differences are maybe between the plugin and core right now.
It says version 0. Is that true?
Right, and that's I don't know. I make themes.
I know where to find out.
But those are the things to poke around. So yeah.
This is great though. I love this. I like lists and indents, and yeah, this is perfect. If it's complete, then I have no idea if it is. I'm looking to see if I see anything really obvious that should be here that isn't. Like, you know, gray duotone is not here, so it can't be the latest.
True.
Well, if something like this does exist that's actually being used, that would be very useful.
Duotone is on line 89.
Why is it on line 89?
Because it's under color.
Oh, I might be in a different file.
I clicked the latest link you sent.
Oh, I was on the one before it, the one that says JSON schema.
Keep up, Daisy.
People are always telling me that.
Just being thorough. I get it.
I'm supposed to know all the things about all the things. 89. All right. Okay, I found it. All right. So it's structured a little differently, but this looks like it might be the real deal.
There's actually more valid settings in typography than I was aware of. So I'm glad I looked at this again today.
I didn't know there. I don't think I knew there was letter spacing.
That's one of the new ones that I
A text
I
decoration
don't
would be
know if
nice.
it's going to be 5.8.
It might not be, but this call for testing is actually not 5.8 oriented, which really messed me up for a while. When I was writing the steps, I'm like, but you can't do that. And then Anne was like, but that's not what we're supposed to be doing right now.
No, it's true. The call for testing is for site editing, and then
Yeah.
we're using block themes in it. So, but
It's so confusing to try to figure out which paradigm you're working under.
and I missed the navigation block so much. I'm working without Gutenberg.
Yeah,
That drove me back to the plugin. Once the navigation block was gone, I was like, I'm done. I'm going back to the plugin. So
yeah, it is it makes it the selling point. That was the big selling point for trying to use the template editor, is if you're really going to create a template and you don't have any navigation, then it's just a landing page again. So I know that the promise is there and we are going to get it, but we're not there yet. So.
Just have to agree on the markup, isn't that it? And perhaps
always
add
it?
a little bit, add the image block features so that we can build real large menus.
Mega menus. Everybody wants mega menus.
I would right now settle for being able to change the background color on the submenus.
Submenus, yes.
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 Because now it's always white.
Yeah,
you can do that.
For the entire block, but not only for the sub.
Well, if you set the background color for the entire block, then it will do the submenus.
you can do it with CSS.
Yeah. You
Yes,
can always
of
do it with
course,
CSS.
That's how we're, I wouldn't say cheating, but yeah,
Yeah.
it's absolutely, it's
But I've got a problem now that my in the version of Gutenberg I'm using, the responsive menu doesn't actually do anything anymore. It goes down to a hamburger, but you click on it, nothing happens.
Sounds like a scripting problem, usually.
Yeah, unless there's a conflict with it.
But is there a new version of Gutenberg available today? 11?
I think it's probably RC came out today, or is coming out today.
No,
or in
I think
between.
it's the.
I thought it was the 30th.
11.
Yeah.
A new one comes out every morning for me because I just update trunk.
Yes, and there is always, if you want trunk, the easiest, there are a couple of ways to get it. One is you can actually get it directly from GitHub. If you go into the end-to-end testing area, you can download a zip.
It's a dangerous place to live, though.
It is. Or you go to gutenbergtimes.com and you download the latest nightly.
Yeah.
And then somebody else did that work for you. But I wouldn't put it on production. So testing only, please.
If you're a Windows developer, you probably find difficulty building the latest version of Trunk because some of the processes don't seem to work very well on Windows.
Yeah, I don't think that there are a ton of Windows-oriented people doing the setup for all that. But I don't know. I
haven't run into any problems this morning, but again, it's been a couple of hours since I pulled it, so everything can happen during that time.
It'd be totally different by now.
Yes. But for example, if you're ignoring Gutenberg for a bit and the WP-env, not all commands work on Windows. And it's a bit annoying.
What's interesting here is that the schema is defined in PHP, and the JSON file is actually sort of JavaScript stuff. So hopefully all of the JavaScript developers can read PHP, but not necessarily the other way around.
Well, I am definitely a JavaScript and not a PHP developer. I can kind of read that part.
Number this channel, Jim?
Hold on.
Okay, I'm going to leave for today. So thank you for the chat.
Sounds
I
good.
enjoyed
Thanks for,
this.
thank you for joining us.
Good opportunity to chat a little bit about my
I also
question.
have some lunch waiting for me, so I'm
Yeah, we're
about to-
about 15 minutes over my original plan. So we got so into it. I didn't even realize what time it was.
Well, we've got something important going on here in the UK. First of all,
Exactly.
there was the Tour de France happening up the mountain where my mum used to live. And I got to go and find out whether or not Mark Cavendish has been knocked out. And then there's a bit of football going on. Soccer.
Yes.
Okay,
For
until
our
next
benefit.
time.
All right. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks for your time.
Thank you.
Feel free to reach out if you have
Good
any
night.
other thoughts or questions or anything. So thanks.
Bye.
Thank you so much.
Bye.
Bye.